Well, welcome to the Debt Matters Podcast, where we help Canadians find solutions to their debt with licensed insolvency trustees from across the country. I'm Wayne Kay, and in today's show, we're going to be talking about teaching kids to save money, which is such a great gift, one of the great gifts that you can give your kids. To help me out with this topic today, Mark Marshall joining me from Allen Marshall and Associates from the Maritimes, and they've got offices in Alberta as well. Mark, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I love talking about kids and money and games and anything you can do to teach them to save, because I did not get taught that. I got taught just basic stuff, but it wasn't like what we did with our kids.
I mean, it's one of those things. It's not an easy topic for people. I mean, it's not always about saving too. It's about just kind of understanding income, understanding bills, making sure that you're kind of controlling the expectation of your children. Because I mean, anyone that's had kids know that they'll stand around. They have lots of wants. And so knowing the difference between wants and needs, and just kind of understanding, where money's coming from, where money is required to go, and just kind of setting them off on the right path. Because again, like you mentioned, when we were kids, a lot of times that's kind of hush-hush stuff. Your parents didn't talk about it. Yeah. They just carried on, and they did what they needed to do to survive.
Yeah. Here's your jars. Here's 3 jars. Here's for giving, and here's for saving, and here's for spending. Well, when I got like $1.50, what good is that for teaching anything? But so things have definitely changed for sure. So when we're talking about teaching kids about money, obviously younger kids, yes, but are we talking more about teenagers and when they get into the work world?
I look at it it makes sense to me to start talking to kids about money around the age of probably 8 to 10 in that zone. And then, build on it from there. But the premise behind it is that kids are smart and they're aware. I mean, I look at my own kids. I mean, my own kids and everybody's kids out there now play video games. They play, Roblox of the world. And in those games, they're required to, obtain money to purchase things for their virtual home, for their virtual pet. And so, where does the money come from? Well, the money comes from either working in that game or selling something in that game, or, you go to mom and dad and ask them for, a payment. And so they have to understand, but they understand how to spend it. They understand how to use it. And so again, I think that the doors to, the assets and liabilities, or the income and the expenses, that starts to open up around that time in situations like that, as they start to the wheels start to turn. They understand. So I think that's kind of your entry point to start having that discussion. I
like that. So these games, they actually are learning a lot more about it than we did, really.
Yeah, they are. And I mean, it's just when we played games as kids, Wayne, I'm assuming that, we raced a car, or we, shot a gun or something. We're not necessarily worried too much about spending money in the game. Right. But again, it's controlling that, because if a kid has an unlimited supply of Robux, for example, well, they're just going to spend it. And that's no different than being in real life. If you have a pocket full of cash and you have, no idea or no clue as to what you're doing with it, well, you're going to find that you're spending it instead of saving it.
Yeah. So what's the best way to get started with teaching kids about money?
I think just having a general discussion, like making it a kind of an open discussion, open concept in your home, explaining, the basics, like, how are you covering the costs of the home you're living in? Is it a rent? Is it mortgage? And, you don't want to stress the kids out. You don't want to pull them into your stresses if you have those stresses. Yeah. But it's one of those things, is having that conversation of, the internet that you're playing the game on. Well, it's not free. It doesn't pump through the lines. You have to explain that it costs money, and the power and the lights, you keep them aware that it's not all free stuff, and it's required to make the payments. And, having those little discussions, they'll spearhead you with questions. They'll ask questions of you. And again, they're not, they're not unaware, they're aware. And so, the more you can educate them and kind of drag them along with information, not overwhelm them, get started early, and they'll start to understand the debits and the credits.
Right. So one of the big things that parents do is allowances. Allowances have been around for a long time. Does it make sense to pay kids for chores these days? Do people do that?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. And yeah, people still do it. I mean, it's, there's a couple of things you want to be aware of. I mean, it's fine to pay kids for chores. One, they're going to learn some work ethic, and two, they're going to learn the value of money. So if I put the time and energy in, I'm going to get rewarded for it. You want to avoid just rewarding, because that happens. It happens in my household. Did you do the chores that I asked you to do? No, but can I still have that $5? No, you can't. Right. So you got to make sure that you're disciplined in terms of instilling that you got to do the work to get the money. And then, again, I think, paying them for chores gives them some kind of foundation. They say, hey, look, I can recognize the value in this dollar. I worked for this, and now I've got some money. And then again, you talk to them and you encourage them. You say, look, with that money, it's your money. You do what you need to do with it. But like, one tip that I would give to parents is you should try to make an effort to suggest to your kids is that for every amount of money that they earn, they should try to save 10 to 15% of it. Right. So if they made, $100, take $15 of it and tuck it away, because you want to establish those good savings habits early on. And if they're taking 15 of their $100 and putting it away, for a rainy day or for an emergency or for some future event, they're going to start that process. And I know myself, I would love to be able to save 15% of what I'm earning. And it's not easy to do. And it's easier to spend that money because you're saying, look, I got the money. But if you can instill it in them early, that will go a long way.
Mm-hmm. And there's something about getting them their first bank account where these days you can get sub accounts as well. So I know with our kids, we got them a bank account, but they also had a savings account. So they had both. So they had to do that 15, 20% had to go into the savings.
Yeah, it makes sense. And again, if you set those up, and I encourage you to do it as a parent, but you set them up, you want to communicate with your kids about what's happening so that they're aware, because again, it's just all of a sudden there's magical savings. Well, communicate with them so they know the plan. They know where the savings is coming from. Well, that savings is coming from money you've deposited, but it's taking 10 to 15% and saving it for you. Now,
you said something that's probably, you don't even realize that you said it, but a lot of parents probably right now just, they had like, stop, what's he saying? And you don't even know what it was. You said, let the kids spend the money on what they want to spend it on.
Yeah.
How many people would say, okay, you've earned the money. Maybe you should spend it on this, right? I guess, how do you lose that control to let the kids do what they want to do with the money?
I think it makes sense to let the kids spend the money on what they want, but talk to them about it, right? So don't just go blind and say, oh, you went down the store and you have no money left over. Talk to them about it, especially early, because it's good to make poor financial decisions early so you can learn from them when you're not talking about a lot of money. Mm-hmm. If a kid saved up $25 and he's gone down and he plays an arcade. I mean, I'm dating myself, but plays an arcade, or he goes and he spends it all on, like penny candies or, whatever it might be. And he comes back and he's got no money left over. Well, you communicate, what did you spend your money on? And, was it worth it? And, just have those conversations so that they can then learn from wasting their money, small amounts of money on penny candy versus later in life, potentially wasting their money on something that they shouldn't be spending their money on. And I think that, again, it's one of those things, you have that conversation, encourage them to save 10 or 15%. They've saved their money. Now do what you want. But in having those conversations, as they get older, you will start to ask them, did you do some comparative shopping? You want to buy a pair of jeans, but did you look around? Yes, you went in that store, you saw them, and you'll start to educate them to say, okay, hey, look, there are other options out here. I don't have to buy on a whim. And again, as a parent, you want to practice that as well, as that you want to, if your son or child comes to you and says, son or daughter comes to you and says, I need this thing. I want to buy it. And you're looking at it saying, yeah, that'd be great. You want to avoid the impulse buy, because again, it's instilling kind of poor behavior. You might say, look, yeah, that would be great to have, but it's not in the budget this month, and let's save towards that. And you have that conversation.
Yeah. Our daughter, I remember she saved and saved and saved and had to buy a name brand shirt. And, and then she bought the shirt, and it was kind of disappointing because there was no more money. Then she realized for all that money, she got one shirt, and she very quickly became a much better shopper and only spending money on things on sale. So, and as parents, it's hard to say, Oh yeah, sure. Go spend that much money on a shirt when you're only 10.
Yeah. but again, it's a lesson learned, because if you had bought the shirt for her and she didn't earn the money for it, then she's just going to turn to the bank of dad and say, Dad, I need another shirt. I need, and you don't learn anything from that. And so again, I think that, making small mistakes are easy to recover from. So you allow them to kind of spread their wings and spend the money, but communicate with them on their spending so that they're aware of what they're doing with it.
Are there some signs that you need to really kind of watch to determine how your kids are handling money or will handle money in the future?
Well, I mean, you just pay attention, because I'll give you an example. This past Christmas, I've got two children. One is 8, one is 11, and I gave them, because they play Robux, and I gave them as part of their Christmas gift, here's a Robux gift card. You can upload some credits on your account. And so in doing that, my youngest, blew the entire gift card that afternoon, gone. Like, I don't know what she was buying, or whatever virtual token she was buying, but she blew the whole thing. My son now, he still has his, right? Yeah. A month and a half, 2 months later, he still has his. And, so it's, again, I look at it and I say, okay, one's obviously a saver. One's not necessarily kind of aware, but at the same time, she is young, but it's a learning moment where you say, okay, you're spending it all and now you don't have anything left. And so if something comes up, you have nothing to buy. So now she's starting to kind of understand, but there's things that you can do. I mean, one thing that I was reading about is that you can, when you're talking about money or allowances is what they call you alluded to it, but the jar system, but having a clear jar, not a piggy bank, but a clear jar. And, your son or daughter would see the money going in, and they see how much is there. And, if they're required to purchase something, you're saying to them, look, grab that money out of the jar. And then they start to see, okay, this is how much has gone in. This is how much is coming out. And it's just a clear indicator just by the sheer volume looking through the glass. Mm-hmm. And so that's, one thing that you can try to do to kind of, get them aimed in the right direction in terms of you start to see some kind of behaviors. But I think it's just, you just have to pay attention to them. You have to pay attention. If you have a child that's always asking for more, I think, again, having that open discussion, that open dialogue with them about, the budget, how much is coming in, where's the money going, and what's required to be kind of set back to cover household expenses. And it's just, there's not, the quote unquote money tree in the backyard.
Yeah. I think the stat said 47% of Canadians are like just on the verge of being broke every month. And we look at the expenses that we have now, which are far greater. And I've done some math just over, what we're dealing with nowadays versus what we lived with 30 years ago. We didn't have to pay internet. We didn't have cell phones. And the cell phone contracts, those can be running $80 each, maybe even more, $100. Now, all of a sudden, you got 4 family members because every person has to have a cell phone, especially if you're a teenager. I know of one teenager that does not have a cell phone, but every other teenager has one, right? Because that's their interaction. That's what they use. But that is a lot of money coming out of your account every month. That's extra that we didn't have 30 years ago. So do you charge the kids for cell phones? How do you think families should look at something like that?
I think what you do is you just look at a family, do your best to look at a family plan, look to see, okay, what kind of savings can we generate? Are we able to share the data? Is there things that we can do? Now, obviously with teenagers, sharing data could be a scary thing because, it only takes 1 or 2 of them. They could destroy the entire amount, but you can also, you can lock the kids down in terms of how much data use they can have, or, you set it up as a pay as you go. And then again, they're in control of their own fate. You could ask them to contribute some money on a month-to-month basis to the family pot towards it, because again, you got to communicate with them. And if you're struggling, the kids have to make sacrifices as well. And they have to recognize is that, and be aware that keeping up with the Joneses it's hard not to do that, but it's also important to be aware that, hey, we got to be smart as a family. We got to recognize the expenses. Mom and dad can't suffer while the kids have unlimited access to, their Facebook and Twitter and TikTok accounts. You sit down with them and you say, what's important. You want to communicate with your friends. This is what it's costing us. Here's what we have to try to do. And again, maybe it is a pay as you go. And, if you have to get the kids to pay for it, if they're working or they're receiving an allowance from you, so be it. Again, it's going to teach them the value of money. It's going to teach them the value of service.
My kids had to monitor their data. I never paid for it, by the way. They had to do it. So they're a little older. They're kind of in their 20s now. But they were working. They had their own phones. But they had to monitor their own data because they knew if they went over, that was it.
That's a problem. Yeah.
It's like you can't go over one time. And I think, just them knowing that boundary that, this is a cell phone company. They don't care. They would rather take all the money that it can charge you if you go over. And I think those are good lessons for us, even as adults, to be paying attention, because I know a lot of people, they don't really know exactly where they sit financially.
No, that's right. And like you look at it from a perspective, you said your kids are off to university and school. So if you had sent them out the door, their first or second year university, cell phones always been paid, never had to be conscious of how much data they're using. Well, that's Pandora's box, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to end up with a massive bill in the first month, and all of a sudden they're dipping into their student loan money or whatever they need to do. And so again, if you can arm them with information and make sure they're aware, well, it's going to be sitting in the back of their brains in terms of making sure that they're making wise financial choices.
Right. But we don't need to stress them out. If we're in financial trouble, we don't need to add that stress to them.
No, sure. And I don't think it's important to not stress them out. You don't want to sit down with your kids and say, "Oh my God, we're probably going to make rent this month." I mean, look, that's a family concern,
right?
But if you can try to avoid, especially with young children, and it's just making sure that they're aware so that they're not stressing you out by asking for the latest sneakers, asking for the latest, designer shirt. You're just explaining to them kind of, here's how much money's coming in. And I think it's important, when you look at family budgets or family financing as the kids get older, is to make them aware, because one, if you can show them how much money's coming into your household and you're comfortable doing, and you can show them what the expenditures are, they're going to have some sympathy towards you if you're strapped. It's going to also educate them. They're going to look at, from a broad stroke perspective, they're going to look and say, okay, what is my mother or father doing for a living right now? What are they making for income? Maybe that's what they want to do, and that's fine. But maybe they look at it and say, here's an opportunity for me to know that I want to make more. Okay, what options do I have from an education standpoint to make a bit more? And I think all of that stuff is intertwined. And so I think if you can keep the kids educated, keep them aware of the finances of the household, make them semi-aware of what you're earning. And again, you reiterate to them that's a confidential conversation. That's not a conversation that they have with, with their friends or online, not telling everyone what mom and dad make. But if you can kind of have that conversation and they're aware of what the expenses look like, again, it can set them up for future, because they're gonna look at their own master plan and say, okay, what makes sense for me? What do I want to do? What do I want to accomplish? But if they just get out into the world and have no kind of understanding of what things cost, no understanding of how much money has to be earned to cover a cost, you're set. You could be potentially setting them up for failure.
I love it. I could just talk about this all day long, but unfortunately we have a limited amount of time. Any final words of wisdom you want to share with us today, Mark, regarding this topic?
I just the final words I'd have is just don't be afraid to talk about money. People are very afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about their own finances. And I think, share with your partner, discuss with your partner what's going on, because again, even from, regardless if it's kids, but if you have, a husband and wife team, if you have one person's a saver and one person's a spender, mm-hmm. well, you're always sitting at a zero mark. Mm-hmm. Right. And so you gotta team up. And so the key with that is to communicate, and then communication